The morning had started so perfectly. The sun was shining through a cloudless blue sky, birds were chirping from the maple trees lining our suburban street, and I had just brewed the perfect cup of coffee. I stood on my porch for a moment, taking in the peaceful scene before heading to work. My travel mug was still steaming, keys jingling in my right hand as I descended the 3 steps from my front door. That was when I spotted him. A stocky man in a wrinkled orange vest was crouched beside my car, which was parked exactly where it always was, in front of my house, perfectly aligned with the curb. He appeared to be inspecting my front tire with unusual interest. At first, I assumed he might be from the utility company checking something near the sidewalk. But as I approached, he straightened up and turned toward me with an expression that could only be described as confrontational. "Good morning," I called out, maintaining a friendly tone despite the uncomfortable feeling growing in my stomach. "Can I help you with something?" The man adjusted his orange vest importantly and squared his shoulders. "This your vehicle?" he demanded, pointing at my silver sedan. "Yes, that is my car," I replied, taking another step forward. "Is there a problem?" He pulled out a clipboard with several official-looking forms attached. "I am with Neighborhood Parking Enforcement," he announced in a voice loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "Your car is improperly parked and in violation of HOA regulations." I blinked in confusion. Having lived in this neighborhood for over 5 years, I knew the HOA rules backward and forward. There were no parking restrictions on this street during weekdays, and my car was well within the allowed space. "There must be some mistake," I said calmly. "I have never had an issue parking here before. What specific violation are you referring to?" The man scowled and jabbed his finger at a piece of paper. "Section 8, Paragraph 4 of the HOA Parking Code. Your vehicle is parked more than 6 inches from the curb and is encroaching on community space." I walked around to examine my car's position. It was perhaps 4 inches from the curb, well within any reasonable limit. "That cannot be right," I protested. "My car is properly parked. I would like to see the specific regulation you are citing." His face darkened. "Look, I do not make the rules, I just enforce them." He reached into a large duffel bag sitting on the sidewalk and pulled out a yellow metal boot. "This vehicle is getting clamped for violation. You can pay the fine and have it removed, or it stays put." My heart began racing. "Can I see your identification, please? Who exactly are you with?" He patted his chest pocket dismissively. "I left my ID badge in the truck, but you can call the HOA if you want," he shrugged. "It will not help you much. The violation has already been logged." The situation was escalating quickly. "I am not comfortable with you placing that device on my car without proper identification," I stated firmly. "Please wait while I contact the HOA myself." "Not my problem, lady," he snapped, kneeling down beside my front tire. "I have got 12 more violations to process today. You can sort it out with the office." I stood there, watching helplessly as he positioned the bright yellow clamp around my tire. Something about this man felt deeply wrong. His vest looked cheap, almost like a construction vest you could buy at any hardware store. The paperwork on his clipboard was photocopied and smudged, and his aggressive demeanor seemed designed to intimidate rather than help resolve an issue. But what could I do? If I physically tried to stop him, I could be accused of assault. If he really was legitimate, I could face additional penalties for interfering. So I stood frozen, a sick feeling spreading through my chest as the metal clamp closed around my tire with a definitive click. "That will be $150 to remove the boot," he announced, standing up and dusting off his knees. He pulled out a worn receipt pad from his back pocket. "Cash only." "Cash only?" I repeated incredulously. "That does not sound right. The HOA always accepts checks or electronic payments for any fees." He shrugged, the corner of his mouth twitching slightly. "New policy, too many bounced checks, cash only for on-site enforcement actions." I crossed my arms firmly across my chest. "I am not giving you any money until I speak with someone from the HOA board. This whole situation seems highly irregular." His face flushed an alarming shade of red. "Listen, I do not make the rules," he shouted, his voice echoing down the quiet street. You either pay the fine now or I call for a tow truck and then you will be paying 300 plus towing fees. I pulled out my phone. Fine, I will call the HOA right now and sort this out. Go ahead, he said, his confidence unnerving. They open at 9, good luck getting through. I dialed the HOA number from my contacts list, and just as he predicted, it went straight to voicemail. I left a detailed message explaining the situation and requesting an immediate callback. When I looked up from my phone, the man was watching me with thinly veiled amusement. Told you, he said smugly. Now about that payment. I am not paying anything without confirmation, I insisted, feeling my own temper rising. This does not feel right. I want to see your identification and official documentation of this supposed violation. Instead of responding to my request, he pulled out his own phone and held it up as if recording me. I need you to step back from me right now, he announced loudly. Stop harassing me. I am just doing my job. I stood dumbfounded as he continued his theatrical performance. This homeowner is becoming aggressive and interfering with official HOA business, he narrated into his phone. I may need backup. What are you doing? I demanded. I am simply asking for identification, which you are required to provide if you are representing the HOA. By this point, our heated exchange had drawn attention. Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street emerged from her house, followed by the retired couple who lived next door to me. A few minutes later, several other neighbors had gathered at a cautious distance, watching the confrontation unfold. The man lowered his phone slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the growing audience. I took the opportunity to address my neighbors. Does anyone recognize this man? Has anyone seen him working with our HOA before? There was a moment of uncertain silence before Mrs. Rodriguez spoke up. I have lived here 8 years and never seen him. Another neighbor, a young woman I recognized but whose name I could not recall, stepped forward hesitantly. He was here last month, she said quietly. I saw him put one of those boots on the Chen's car. They paid him to take it off. The man glared at her, then quickly composed himself. I work for a third-party enforcement company contracted by your HOA, he explained to the gathered crowd. I am simply doing the job I was hired to do. Something in his explanation did not add up. Our HOA was small and operated on a tight budget. The idea that they would contract with an outside enforcement agency seemed implausible. I pulled out my own phone and began recording. I am documenting this interaction for my own protection, I announced clearly. Since you refuse to provide identification, I need some record of this encounter. The man's demeanor shifted subtly. He checked his watch and began gathering his paperwork. Look, I have got other stops to make. You have 1 hour to pay the fine before the tow truck arrives. Your choice. But I was not backing down. With neighbors watching and my car immobilized, I knew this confrontation had crossed a line. This man had just messed with the wrong homeowner, and a nagging feeling told me I had some leverage I had not yet remembered. As the tension hung in the air, something clicked in my brain, a memory that sent a surge of confidence through my body. My Aunt Rita. How could I have forgotten? She did not work for our HOA, she worked for the city itself. Aunt Rita was not just any employee either. She was the head of city parking enforcement, the actual legitimate authority responsible for overseeing all parking regulations across the entire metropolitan area. With shaking hands, I stepped away from the growing crowd and quickly dialed her number. She answered on the third ring. Aunt Rita, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I have got a situation at my house. There is a man here claiming to be parking enforcement. He put a boot on my car and is demanding cash to remove it. What? Her voice sharpened instantly. Our department does not operate in your neighborhood. That is private HOA property. We have no jurisdiction there unless specifically requested. I thought so, I replied, relief flooding through me. He is wearing an orange vest and refusing to show ID. Orange vest, she repeated. City enforcement wears blue uniforms with proper insignia. Can you send me a video of this person? Absolutely. I switched to video call mode and subtly turned the phone toward the man, who was now looking increasingly impatient. My aunt's reaction was immediate. "That man is not one of ours. He is not with the city at all." Her voice was cold with professional fury. "Keep him there. Do not let him leave. I am 10 minutes away." "How am I supposed to do that?" I whispered. "Just engage him. Ask questions. Pretend you are considering payment. Whatever you do, do not let him know I am coming." I ended the call and returned to the scene with renewed purpose. The man was already packing up his duffel bag, preparing to leave. "Wait," I called out, injecting confusion into my voice. "I am trying to understand how this all works. If I pay you now, how do I know the boot will be removed properly?" He paused, clearly relieved that I seemed to be accepting defeat. "I take the payment, give you a receipt, and remove the boot. Simple as that." "And this is a new HOA policy? The cash-only thing?" I asked, stepping closer. "Because I would hate to have this happen again. Maybe you could explain exactly which part of my parking was wrong so I can avoid future violations." He seemed to relax slightly, launching into an explanation of imaginary parking regulations. I nodded attentively, asking follow-up questions whenever he seemed ready to wrap up. All the while, I was intensely aware of the clock ticking, counting down the minutes until my aunt's arrival. "So the 6-inch rule, is that measured from the top of the tire to the curb or from the bottom?" I asked, knowing the question made little sense but hoping to buy more time. He hesitated, clearly making up the answer on the spot. "It is measured from the outer edge of the tire to the raised portion of the curb." As he continued his fabricated explanation, I noticed his eyes repeatedly darting toward the street entrance. He was getting nervous, sensing something was not right about my sudden cooperative attitude. "You know what?" he said abruptly, checking his watch again. "I will give you a break this time. If you can pay half now, $75, I will remove the boot and waive the rest of the fine." His eagerness to conclude our business only confirmed my suspicions, but I needed just a few more minutes. "That is very generous," I said, pretending to search through my purse. "Let me see if I have enough cash on me." Just as I was running out of delay tactics, I spotted a city vehicle turning onto our street, moving with deliberate purpose toward my house. My heart leaped. Aunt Rita had arrived. The official city parking enforcement vehicle pulled up directly behind my booted car, its government insignia gleaming in the morning sunlight. The fake enforcer's face visibly paled as he watched my aunt emerge from the driver's seat. She was dressed in her full uniform, navy blue with official city patches, a proper badge displayed prominently on her chest, and a hat bearing the city emblem. Everything about her screamed legitimate authority. Aunt Rita approached with measured, confident steps. Her expression was professionally neutral, but I could see the controlled anger in her eyes. The neighbors, sensing the dramatic shift in the situation, edged closer. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "I am Rita Lawson, head of city parking enforcement." She held up her official identification card. "May I ask who you are and what agency you represent?" The man's demeanor instantly changed. His shoulders hunched defensively, and his eyes darted between my aunt and the gathering crowd. John Miller," he stammered. "I am with Advanced Parking Solutions, contracted by the local HOA." Aunt Rita nodded, maintaining her professional composure. "May I see your credentials, Mr. Miller?" He patted his pockets nervously. "Like I told her, I left my ID in my truck, but I have got paperwork here that shows." "And what is your employee identification number?" Aunt Rita interrupted, pulling out an official-looking tablet. APS 4721, he replied after a moment's hesitation. My aunt typed the information into her device, then turned the screen toward him. "That is interesting, Mr. Miller, because there is no registered parking enforcement officer with that number in our database. In fact, there is no company called Advanced Parking Solutions registered with the city as a legitimate parking enforcement contractor." The neighbors had formed a semicircle around us now, several of them with phones raised, recording the unfolding scene. Mrs. Rodriguez whispered something to the man next to her, and he nodded grimly. "There must be some confusion. the man insisted, his voice rising slightly. I just enforce the HOA rules. This is not a city matter. Actually, it is, Aunt Rita replied coolly. Impersonating a parking enforcement officer is a criminal offense under City Code Section 1843. Additionally, extorting money from residents using fraudulent authority falls under Section 2217. The man's face flushed and he took a step backward. This is ridiculous. I was just following the HOA guidelines. Then you would not mind waiting while we contact the HOA president to verify your employment, Aunt Rita suggested, though it was clearly not a question. The man glanced at his duffel bag, then toward the street, calculating his escape route. In one sudden movement, he lunged for his bag and turned to run. Sir, Aunt Rita's voice cracked like a whip. Stop immediately. He froze, perhaps realizing that fleeing would only make his situation worse, especially with so many witnesses present. Aunt Rita calmly reached for her radio. This is Head of Enforcement Lawson requesting assistance at 1423 Oakwood Drive. Subject detained for impersonation of city officer and fraud. No weapons visible, but subject attempted to flee. You cannot do this, the man hissed, his face contorted with anger and fear. You have no right to detain me. Actually, as a city official witnessing an active crime, I have every right, my aunt replied evenly. And you just attempted to flee, which does not help your case. The neighbors had grown silent, watching the drama unfold with rapt attention. I could see several of them exchanging knowing glances. Perhaps they too had been approached by this man before. I suggest you sit down and wait for my colleagues to arrive, Aunt Rita continued, gesturing to the curb. They will want to ask you some questions about your operation. For a moment, I thought he might try to run again, but Aunt Rita's commanding presence, coupled with the crowd of witnesses, seemed to deflate his resistance. He sank down onto the curb, dropping his head into his hands. Within minutes, 2 official police cars rounded the corner, their lights flashing but sirens silent. Justice had arrived, and the fake enforcer's game was over. The responding officers approached with practiced efficiency, quickly separating the man from his duffel bag and leading him to a patrol car for questioning. One officer removed the boot from my tire using a special key they had requested from actual city enforcement, while another began collecting statements from the gathered neighbors. Aunt Rita conferred with the senior officer, showing him documentation on her tablet and pointing occasionally toward the man's equipment. Their conversation was serious, punctuated by expressions of disbelief and concern from the officer. After about 20 minutes, Aunt Rita approached me with a grim smile. Well, we have got quite a situation here, she said, keeping her voice low. Your instincts were right. This man is not who he claimed to be. Who is he then? I asked, still processing the morning's events. His real name is Thomas Randall, she explained. He used to work for Citywide Towing until about 6 months ago when he was fired for overcharging customers and pocketing the difference. Apparently, he decided to take his scam independent. The officer who had been questioning the neighbors joined us. Ma'am, we have got 5 residents here who say they have paid this individual in the past 3 months. Amounts ranging from $75 to $200, all in cash. Another neighbor, an elderly man I recognized from the community garden, stepped forward hesitantly. I paid him $120 last week, he admitted, his voice shaking slightly. He said my car was blocking a fire lane, but I checked afterward and it was not. I was too embarrassed to report it. One by one, neighbors came forward with similar stories. The young woman from the Chen's house explained how her parents, who spoke limited English, had paid the man $160 without question, afraid of getting in trouble with authorities. As statements were collected, a disturbing pattern emerged. Thomas Randall had been systematically targeting our neighborhood for months, focusing particularly on elderly residents, those who appeared to be immigrants, and people who were likely to pay without question rather than risk confrontation. Based on the statements we have gathered so far, Aunt Rita informed me, reviewing her notes, this man has collected approximately $5,000 from your neighborhood alone, and we suspect this is not the only community he has been targeting. The HOA president, a flustered woman in business attire, arrived at the scene after receiving multiple calls from residents. She emphatically denied any knowledge of the man or his activities. "We would never contract with an outside company without informing residents," she insisted. "And we certainly would never authorize cash-only payments for violations. This is completely unauthorized." The officers finished collecting evidence, photographing the fake documentation, the homemade boot, and the receipt book containing records of previous violations. Thomas Randall sat in the back of a patrol car, staring straight ahead, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. "We are charging him with multiple counts," the senior officer explained to the gathered crowd. "Fraud, impersonating a city official, extortion, and possession of illegal booting equipment. Given his previous employment, he knew exactly how to make this scam look legitimate." As the neighbors dispersed, many approached me to express their gratitude. If not for my confrontation and my aunt's timely intervention, the scam might have continued indefinitely. The community had been victimized by a predator who understood exactly how to exploit people's fear of authority and bureaucracy. But the worst part was knowing how many people had simply paid him without question, too intimidated or uncertain to challenge someone who appeared to represent official authority. The thought that he had successfully targeted so many of my neighbors made my blood boil. 3 months later, I sat on an uncomfortable wooden bench in a crowded courtroom, watching as Thomas Randall was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit. The irony of the color, so similar to the fake vest he had worn during his scam, was not lost on me. The courtroom was filled with faces I recognized from my neighborhood and, surprisingly, from several other communities across the city. Word of the case had spread, and many victims had come forward once they realized they were not alone. Randall had accepted a plea deal rather than face a full trial, pleading guilty to multiple counts of fraud, impersonation, and extortion. Now we were gathered for his sentencing and to hear victim impact statements. Aunt Rita sat beside me, her posture perfect, her uniform pressed and official. She would be testifying not just as a witness, but as an expert on city parking regulations and enforcement procedures. The judge, a stern-faced woman with silver hair, called the court to order. The proceedings began with the prosecutor summarizing the case against Randall. The scope of his operation was even larger than we had initially thought. In total, he had scammed nearly $15,000 from unsuspecting residents across 3 different neighborhoods. When it was Aunt Rita's turn to testify, she approached the stand with professional confidence. She explained how Randall had exploited his knowledge from previous employment to create a convincing facade, how he had specifically targeted vulnerable individuals, and how his actions had undermined public trust in legitimate city officials. "Your Honor," she concluded, "this was not merely a financial crime. Mr. Randall's actions have created lasting damage to community trust and safety. Residents now question legitimate authorities and feel vulnerable in their own neighborhoods." Several neighbors took the stand next. Mrs. Chen, speaking through an interpreter, described how frightened she had been when Randall threatened to have her car towed. The elderly man from our community garden explained how the $120 he paid represented nearly half of his monthly discretionary income. When my turn came, I approached the stand with a mixture of nervousness and determination. After being sworn in, I described that morning in detail, how Randall had attempted to intimidate me, how he had refused identification, and how close he had come to successfully scamming me as well. "The most disturbing part," I said, looking directly at Randall, "was how practiced he was. This was clearly not his first attempt. He knew exactly what to say and how to act to make people feel powerless. If not for my aunt's position, I might have become just another victim." The judge listened attentively to all testimony, taking occasional notes. When everyone had spoken, she addressed Randall directly. "Mr. Randall, you have preyed upon people in their own communities, exploiting their trust and fear to enrich yourself. You specifically targeted those you perceived as vulnerable or unlikely to question authority. This court takes such violations of community trust very seriously." She sentenced him to 18 months in prison, 3 years of probation afterward, and full restitution to all identified victims. Additionally, he was prohibited from working in any capacity related to parking, towing, or enforcement after his release. As the gavel fell, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Justice had been served, but the damage to community trust remained. Looking around at the faces of my neighbors, I could see similar conflicted expressions. After the proceedings, the city's mayor approached Aunt Rita with a commendation for her quick action and thorough investigation. She accepted it graciously, but later told me she was simply doing her job, protecting citizens from those who would abuse authority. The real heroes, she told me as we left the courthouse, are the people who came forward with their stories. That takes courage. The weeks following the trial brought an unexpected sense of purpose. What had begun as a personal confrontation had revealed a community-wide vulnerability. Many of my neighbors had paid Randall without question, not because they were foolish, but because they lacked the information and confidence to challenge someone who appeared to represent authority. I decided to do something about it. With the support of several neighbors, I organized a community awareness meeting at the local library. To my surprise, nearly 60 people showed up, not just from our neighborhood, but from surrounding communities as well. Aunt Rita agreed to lead a workshop on identifying legitimate officials versus potential scammers. She brought examples of real city ID badges, authentic uniforms, and properly marked vehicles. She explained the protocols that genuine enforcement officers are required to follow and the rights residents have when approached by someone claiming authority. A legitimate official will never refuse to show identification, she emphasized to the attentive crowd. They will never demand immediate cash payment, and they will always provide multiple ways to verify their identity and authority. I shared the video footage I had captured during my confrontation with Randall, narrating what red flags I had noticed but initially ignored. Seeing it played back on the library's projector screen made the warning signs seem obvious in hindsight. His aggressive behavior, the refusal to provide identification, the insistence on cash payment. Trust your instincts, I told the group. If something feels wrong, it probably is. The HOA board, eager to repair their tarnished image, sent representatives to the meeting. They announced new policies, including clearer communication about any legitimate enforcement actions, proper identification for all HOA representatives, and a verification system residents could use to confirm the legitimacy of any HOA actions. We have also installed new signage throughout the neighborhood, the HOA president explained, showing photographs of the newly posted signs that clearly explained parking regulations and provided a 24-hour verification number. In the days following the meeting, something remarkable happened. Neighbors who had barely spoken before began checking in on one another. A community watch program formed spontaneously, with residents agreeing to alert each other about any unusual activities or suspicious individuals. For my own peace of mind, I installed a high-definition security camera overlooking my driveway and the street in front of my house. Many neighbors followed suit, creating an informal network of surveillance that would make future scammers think twice before targeting our community. The local newspaper ran a feature story about the case, helping spread awareness to other neighborhoods. Aunt Rita received numerous requests to conduct similar workshops across the city, which her department officially incorporated into their community outreach program. 6 months after that fateful morning, our neighborhood had transformed. What had been a collection of individual homes had become a true community, vigilant, informed, and connected. The experience that had begun with fear and helplessness had evolved into empowerment and solidarity. As I sat on my porch one evening, watching neighbors chat while walking their dogs or tending to their gardens, I reflected on how a moment of doubt and confrontation had led to something unexpectedly positive. The fake parking enforcer had targeted us because he thought we were disconnected and vulnerable. In exposing his scheme, we had discovered our collective strength. The boot that had been meant to immobilize my car had ultimately mobilized an entire community. And that, perhaps, was the most satisfying revenge of all.